So I'm Nia. Probably some of you don't know me. Maybe kind of the first time to see me, leading the program. So let me introduce myself. That I'm Nia. I am a new lecturer in the Faculty of Social Sciences. Today, I'm gonna lead the program for 1.5 hours together with Dr. Irfan. So he gonna talk about India. If you have sit for some classes on political science or maybe some kind of global relations or politics, then you may be well known or well informed about what kind of country India is, right? So India is it's rich in historical legacy and heritage to human civilization. It's kind of so many stuff people dig or read from the old stuff. And then its rises in economy, energy, security, and military power. Yeah, that's what we get used to, to the information about India. And then there is also its complex, diverse ethnicities, where the Muslims, the Christians, the Jains, the Sikhs were among, the minorities to the dominant Hindu followers. So of course, a lot of study has been done about almost in every kind of aspect of India, but I think the speaker that we have today has particularly distinct background that can be taken as as an extra, a different kind of deliverance of narratives. Why? Because Dr. Irfanullah Farooqi has a background like a living actor, living historical actor, perhaps, if you want to say, because he was born and raised in India. He's a Muslim, and he has he has been involved in numerous kind of activisms, dealing with all this kind of calling or advocating for the equal rights in social and political spheres of minorities in India. So yeah, he kind of concentrated the advocate of himself not only toward the Muslims, also other kind of differences, the Christians, and other kind of believers in India. So his academic experience in Jamia Millia of New Delhi and Aligarh University, and then in South Asian University. So with that kind of background, I think we got to hear a lot of a lot of stuff from him that perhaps will contribute to the heat of our discussion today. And yeah, his amount of published researches on historical and language politics, society and culture, and now transnational traveling experiences between India, Turkey, and Germany, with that kind of background. And his work have appeared in Business and Economic Weekly, Sage Publishing, and numerous national publisher in India. Besides continuing the activism for social and political equality. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Irfan to deliver his presentation. Dr. Irfan, your time is 1 hour, and we will follow with the question and answer for the rest 30 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll just share the screen. Can you see this? Yeah?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Perfect.
So, all right. Thank you very much, Dr. Tiliana, for inviting me. I'm slightly unwell, but I think I'll manage the next hour and a half. It shouldn't really be a problem. So today we will, as all of you would know, we will speak about communalism in India. And my concern is to kind of not just talk about the technicalities of it, but some very crucial developments that have of late taken place in the context of communalism. So not just talking about what it is and what's its trajectory been like in the subcontinent, but more importantly, looking into some of the developments that have taken place. And it is in that regard, in that respect, that I want to draw your attention to nationalism, democracy, and social media. Very briefly, of course, these are lectures in themselves. If one were to kind of talk about the ways in which nationalism and communalism have got together, or democracy and communalism have got together, or social media facilitates communalism. So these are separate topics in themselves. So I'll be discussing these things very briefly, but I'll be very happy to attend to your questions and comments towards the end. So without any further delay, so there are a couple of things that I am interested in. So just to outline the objectives, I will get into, because I'm assuming that some of you might not be aware of communalism, because it is pretty much a subcontinental problem. So I'm not really sure whether in the Far East or Southeast, in Southeast actually, whether we have problems of this sort or not. So just to play safe, I decide to kind of share with you overview and explanation, and then some of the recent developments, and then nationalism in India, an overview, then communalism and nationalism, the ways in which they are connected with each other, what kind of an unholy alliance is in the making, then democracy and nationalism, and social media and communalism. And lastly, concluding remarks. There's a slight mistake here. It's not democracy and nationalism, it's democracy and communalism. My apologies for that oversight on my part. Okay, so these are the objectives very quickly, just to develop a comprehensive understanding of the trajectory of communalism in India, then to look into the striking ways in which communalism has had an ally in nationalism, democracy, and social media. And lastly, to figure out or to try to look into what these unholy alliances suggest for the marginalized, right? The minorities, as Dr. Tiliana was pointing out, especially religious minorities such as particularly Muslims and Christians. So India has a number of religious minorities, but invariably when we look at the minority question, we are primarily looking at the Christians and the Muslims, because the other minorities get appropriated. So for instance, the Buddhists are considered as part of the Hindu social order. The Jains are considered as part of the Hindu social order, and the Sikhs are also considered as part of the Hindu social order. So the Hindu right wing, the populist Hindu right wing, does not really treat these minorities as minorities. They basically consider them as part of the Hindu social order. Whereas when it comes to Muslims and Christians, they are considered as what we call outsiders. These folks actually came from outside. The Christians came in the 1st century AD, the Muslims came in the 7th century AD, and so on. All right, so to look into possible solutions, right? Just to deliberate on what exactly can be done given the situation. So very quickly, what exactly is communalism? And this is very basic stuff, and I'm just trying to sort of build it up so that whatever slightly high-end stuff I discuss eventually, we are able to understand that, so keeping that in mind, I'm just doing something very foundational here. So if you break the term, you have communal and ism. Now, communal in itself is not really a negative thing. So it simply means of, by, or belonging to people of a community. So that's communal. So in India these days, when we use the term communal, we use it in a negative sense. So if you call an individual a communal person, basically what you're suggesting is that this person is not really the right person. Right? This person is corrupted. But communal in itself does not necessarily mean anything negative. It's a neutral term, and we'll come to that. So the question is communal negative or is it positive? Now, if you think about how it acquires different meanings in different contexts, you can immediately figure out that it is neither negative nor positive. It acquires a certain connotation in a certain context. So for instance, if you're using terms like communal violence, communal hatred, communal riots, then here communal acquires a negative connotation. But if you think about terms such as communal dialogue, communal peace, communal harmony, now here, of course, communal is not negative. All right, so it comes from the term community, and community, of course, there could be various ways in which this could be defined. But in sociology, we go ahead with a very foundational definition, which is a group of people identified by a single marker of identity. So for instance, if I say Indian, Now, Indian as a reference could be understood in terms of people united on the basis of a national marker of identity. If I say Indian Muslims, if I say Tamils, if I say um, Dalits, if I say lower caste people, tribal. So we are basically referring to a community on the basis of a specific marker of identity. So community is a group of people identified by a single marker of identity. Now, communalism therefore could be understood as loyalty to one's own group rather than to society as a whole. So if you're a communal person, it is assumed that you are loyal to your group and you're not loyal to the society as a whole. And given the world in which we live, where multiple identities live together, at least in an ideal world, that is what the idea is, that people from different cultures, different religions, different languages live together. So in that kind of a setup, if you're just too preoccupied or obsessed with your own identity, then there are impending issues. So communalism is very critical when it comes to the question of identity. Now, I just want to, give an example, not really example, but kind of elaborate on this in a minute. So for instance, why is it that communalism is a problem? So basically, if you think about ourselves as individuals, we are always carriers of multiple identities, right? So for instance, if I were to speak about myself, I'm a Muslim. So that is one aspect of my identity. But then there are other aspects of my identity as well, in terms of the class that I come from, the caste that I belong to, the gender that I belong to, the region that I come from, the language that I speak, the education that I have, and so on and so forth. So there are multiple identities that we are carriers of all the time. But what communalism does is it keeps all other aspects of identities aside, and it insists on one specific aspect of your identity. That is where there is a problem. So, for instance, to look at a Muslim only as a Muslim, right? Now, a Muslim is not just a Muslim. A Muslim is also someone else. But in communal discourse, the Muslim is reduced to his religion, right? Or the Christian is reduced to his or her religion, and that is where it poses a serious threat to any kind of sensible national development. So the question of identity is very important. And I just shared with you who exactly would be a communal person. Somebody who is not willing to entertain the fact that people around actually have multiple identities. But this communal person is obsessed with just one aspect of the person's identity, which is the religious identity. And this is something that makes a case for the grounds of communalism. I'll just very quickly also point out that very often people think that communalism only has to do with religion. But that's actually a mistake. That's a misconception. Communalism can be on other grounds as well. So, for instance, let me give you a quick example. Let's say that members who speak a certain language, they actually go to a place and they kill people who speak another language. And this has happened in the case of India. So, if members of a certain linguistic community, they end up, violating, or they end up, let's say, killing or harming people of another religious linguistic community, that is also an instance of communalism. This will be called what we call linguistic communalism. So this is communalism on the basis of language. Similarly, if members of a certain caste group, they enter a village and they kill the untouchables, the lower caste people of that village, then this would be called what we call caste-based communalism. So communalism in general, we talk about in relation to religion. But as I just pointed out, that it could be on the basis of other markers of identity as well, right? But generally speaking, when we consider the problem of communalism in India, we are primarily looking at religion, the question of religion and the question of religious minorities. And of course, its presence in India, even after 75 years of India's independence, it simply straightaway suggests the failure of the nation state. So if we still have communalism in the subcontinent, in the country, then what it directly suggests is that the nation state has not really been able to do what it was supposed to do in post-colonial India, that it just failed and failed miserably in carrying out the right set of policies. Right. So it suggests the failure, and then it also stands in the way of the coming into being of a modern society. That's another important point. And there are many scholars who are pointing this out, that if you really want to make this claim that you are a modern nation, that if you really want to have yourselves listed in the list of modern nations of the world, then one of the first things you might want to do is do away with communalism altogether, because communalism suggests a very pathological kind of traditionalism, very pathological kind of parochialism. So if you want to make that claim of being modern, then you must do away with communalism. So as of now, communalism stands in the way of India as a nation becoming modern. So we might make this claim that we are a modern nation, but the fact of the matter is, given this malaise of communalism, given this evil social problem, we cannot really forcefully make that claim. I think that claim remains a shallow claim. We are not a modern society, a modern nation, till the time the evil of communalism resides amidst us. So there is a definition, simply put. This is Peter van der Veer, a very, very famous sociologist from Netherlands. So he points out that communalism basically refers to the articulation of religious communities into mutually antagonistic social, political, and economic groups. So basically, the argument is that in communalism, communities are pitched as mutually antagonistic. And antagonistic essentially means, this is something that Marx has also used in his theory of class struggle, that antagonism means a certain kind of relationship where if you want to do something good for one, you automatically do something bad for the other. That is what we call antagonistic relationship. So in communal discourse these days in India, there is never any, so all these communal leaders always talk about Muslim prosperity as something that is at the cost of Hindu well-being. So if Muslims are prospering, the argument that is made is that because Muslims are prospering, Hindus are not prospering. And because Muslims are doing this, we are not able to do this. So that's what we call antagonistic pitching of the communities. And then following that, communalism is a politics that seeks to unify one community around a religious identity in a hostile opposition to unify one community around a religious identity in a hostile opposition to another. Okay, now how communalism does what it does. So it simply defines the community identity as fixed. So for instance, if we are talking about Muslims of India, the communal people will define Muslims as a fixed identity, meaning that Muslims don't change, that they always remain as it is, which is a very problematic statement to make, because we all know that in our lives we change all the time. And our association with religion, our association with different things, that constantly evolves. It presents the other community's identity as natural, meaning that it talks about as if they have always been like this. So the Muslims, the Christians have been like this right from the beginning, and nothing could be done about it. So whenever you call something natural, something that you are indirectly trying to suggest is that nothing could be done about it. And to understand this better, you can always go back to the 18th century discourse on inequality. So for many, many centuries, inequality was considered as a natural phenomenon, meaning that there is nothing you can do about it. But it goes to the credit of iconic philosophers like Rousseau, who said that, it is not natural, it is social, meaning that we create inequality and we can do something about it. So natural. Then presenting the other community as homogeneous. So for instance, this is also a very interesting thing, that to present the entire Indian Muslim community as a homogeneous community is also a very problematic thing, because within the Muslim community, there are so many disagreements. Within the Muslim community, there are people who are not so religious. Within the Muslim community, there are people who actually do things that are forbidden, but they consider themselves as Muslims. Then there are all kinds of disagreements in terms of jurisprudence. There are all kinds of disagreements in terms of day-to-day life, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very diverse community. And any community, not just Indian Muslim community, any community, whether we are talking about the Hindu community, or the Christian community, or the Sikh community, all communities always are exceptionally diverse. But what communalism does is it presents the community as homogeneous, that all of them are like this only. And then asserting something that's pretty much similar to point number 2 here, that people of the other community were born into that identity, right? But the fact of the matter is that there are conversions that happen. So people actually, out of sheer will and consciousness, they embrace other religions. But communalism is not interested in that. And then identities do not evolve through history over time. That is another important argument. So as a result of all this, these important markers that communalism swears by, what happens is that you have a politics of hatred that is nurtured for an identified other. So the Muslim, particularly, and also the Christian here and there, the Muslim is identified as the cultural, political, religious other. And subsequently, this hate translates into violence. So there is hatred for some time, and then it is built up to an extent that there are moments when this hatred can immediately be translated into violence. Then you have communalism as an ideology. Now, very quickly, what is ideology? I go back to Marx because Marx has presented a very interesting theory of ideology. So I won't go into the details of ideology in capitalism, but ideology in general is to be understood as, as the lens through which you see the world. So Marx points out that there is the individual and there is the reality. And what you have between the reality and the individual is the ideology, right? So ideology is very central. So communalism as an ideology suggests that when people embrace communal ideology, they begin to look at the world a certain way, right? They just become indifferent to other interpretations of the world. So they begin to look at the world a certain way. And once you have the communal ideology in place, then there are a couple of things that happen. So immediately politicization of religious identity takes place. And the reason why politicization of religious identity takes place is to do with the fact that Indians are very sentimental about religion. So I'm not at all saying that Indians are religious. They are not. Let's be very clear about it. Indians are not religious at all. So if you're talking about Hindus, if you're talking about Muslims or Christians or whoever, we are not very particular about our religious obligations. So you will not find all the Muslims in the mosques. You'll not find all the Muslims particular about their Islamic do's and don'ts. That is not the case. I would say not even 5% are particular about the obligations. But everyone is very, very sentimental. So you do something to Islam and I will be furious. I will be, I'll be angry and I can do anything. So it's a very charged up situation. And that is the reason why the sentimental association with religion leads to what we call politicization of religious identity. Then the scope that is offered by Indian secularism, that is also a thing. So in Indian secularism, I can't really go into the details because of paucity of time. But in Indian secularism, there is a certain concession for religion in the public domain. So when you think about Western secularism, religion is a private matter. But in Indian secularism, religion is not a private matter. You are very much allowed to talk about your religion in public. You're allowed to promote your religion. You are allowed to invest in proselytization and so on. You're simply supposed to not talk ill of other religions, but you can very well talk about your religion in public. You can have religious gatherings. And because you have the scope that is offered by Indian constitution and secularism, people can always make use of this. So this always gets misused. So that's another concern. And lastly, use of religion for inappropriate gains and objectives. It's very easy in India. Because religion is so very much a part and parcel of daily life, that you can always misuse the provisions that we have in Indian constitution. So to understand communal ideology as sets of beliefs, which falsely represent the interests of a social group. Now, how did growth of communalism? So basically, very quickly, it started in the 19th century. To be very honest, communalism was never a problem before the British came. So all the historians agree that communalism is a modern problem. It is primarily to do with, colonialism. But yes, in the 19th century, there were developments of sorts that allowed the British people to introduce communalism. So very often we talk about divide and rule policy, and a lot of people have referred to this, that it was because of divide and rule policy that the British introduced communalism, but it is not that simple. The fact is that Hindus and Muslims had already become adversaries. Just one reason that I'll provide, and then I'll move on. So there was a revolt in 1857, which is considered as the first war of independence. So after that, and of course it failed. So 1857 revolt, the war of independence, it failed. It was suppressed and people were persecuted. But after that, what the British did was they introduced this provision of Indians joining the British government, right? So they opened up the government sector for Indians. Now, suddenly the Hindus and the Muslims, they started applying for these jobs. And as they started applying for these jobs, they had to convince the British government that they are the loyal subjects. So the Hindus tried very hard to prove that they were loyal subjects, and the Muslims tried very hard to prove that they were loyal subjects. And in the course of that, what happened was that they actually started talking about the other community as not so loyal. And this is pretty much the beginning of the Hindu-Muslim divide in the subcontinent. So this happens around 1860s, 70s. And then, of course, the communities only get further away from each other. There are different things that emerge, the cow slaughter problem, the language problem. And by the end of the 19th century, the British see that this is the right moment to introduce divide and rule policy, and they introduce it, and immediately the Hindus and the Muslims are divided, and the British can rule India better. So that's your growth of communalism. Then there are causes of communalism. So, of course, the growth and causes are kind of related with each other. But there were, of course, the British, what they also did was they started sympathizing with the Muslims more. And as they sympathized with the Muslims more, the Hindus became more furious. And they developed a more informed, I wouldn't use the word hatred, but let's say unease towards the Muslims of the subcontinent and so on. So some of the causes of communalism. Of course, in the contemporary sphere, one can think about all kinds of causes, ineffective leadership, communal politics, ineffective handling of riots, you have all kinds of reasons. So these are the causes. And then one has to also understand that the communal question in India is basically a middle class question. So even in the 19th century and the 20th century, and even to this date, for the most part, communalism has to do with middle class people. So in the context of India, there is a fantastic historian who's unfortunately dead now. His name is Bipin Chandra. And he writes that till as late as 1937, communalism had to do with government jobs. Right? So communalism primarily was around government jobs, that it was about concession, provision, employment, and so on. So it was basically a middle class thing. Because who are the people who are running after government jobs? Of course, not the upper class people. Of course, not the poor people. These are the middle class people. So communalism remained a middle class question. And even to this day, it is predominantly a middle class question. Then these days, we've seen this, the myths that fan the flames of communalism. So this is also something that we have figured out now, that there are these very, very baseless, absolutely. And myth is, if you look at myth, if you try and understand the idea of myth in anthropology, this is precisely how it is talked about, that it is something that is good to think about. Right? So it is not something that is factual. It is not something that is historically correct, but it is something that appeals to you, and it has a very appealing content to it. So there are all kinds of myths in India. For instance, there is this myth that Muslims very soon are going to outnumber the Hindus. Now, which is a crazy idea, because the Hindus are 79% of India's population and the Muslims are about 14% of India's population. No matter how much they reproduce, they will not be able to outnumber the Hindus. It's absolutely impossible. But then it is a myth that works very well. And a lot of people are still talking about this, that if we don't do anything about the Muslims, very soon they're going to outnumber us. And once they outnumber us, then there will be an Islamic State and the Hindus will be persecuted and whatnot. So it's a very silly thing, but then this is what it is. Then, all kinds of things, that Pakistan, that Indian Muslims celebrate the victory of Pakistan over India, that Muslims are not nationalists, that Muslims hate Indian nationalism, and so on and so forth. There is no end to that list. So this is just a passing capturing. So communalism is the experience of the feeling that people who belong to a particular religion, they form a homogeneous community. That is point number one, having certain common needs, aspirations, and culture. And further, that the survival and growth of this community depends on its forcible domination over it. So the idea that Muslims are going to survive only when they dominate the Hindus. This is the idea. Because the interests of the communities are mutually exclusive. Now there are new forms of communalism, and this is where we're heading towards nationalism, democracy, and social media. So one thing that we have seen off late is that communalism has gone to rural areas, which is the villages of India. So for many years, in fact, for decades, communalism remained an urban phenomenon. It was basically it was to be found in the cities. It was never to be found in the rural areas. People in the villages lived very amicably, they lived in harmony, and for the most part, villages remained clean of this communal virus. But since 2013, which is the what we call the Muzaffarnagar riots, which is Muzaffarnagar is a place not very far from Delhi, about 150 kilometers, 70 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken, and or even less actually. And that's where in the villages, the Muslims were brutally murdered, and in God knows how many numbers. And that marked the beginning of the rural communalism. So this is a new development, and it's a very unfortunate development, because for quite some time we were relaxed about the fact that it is only cities that are plagued by communalism. But now the concern is that now even our villages are down with communalism. Communalism now is not as much about history as much as it is about the future. So for quite some time, people were talking about the past. So they were talking about some invader, some Muslim ruler, and some Hindu ruler, and how this Hindu-Muslim thing is something that we need to do something about. But these days, I don't think communalism is as much interested in history as much as it is interested in the future. So they do not want the Muslims to have a bright future. Let's be very clear about it. And because, again, they believe that if Muslims were to have a bright future, then it'll be at the cost of the Hindus, right? So if Muslims do better, then one way or another, the Hindus won't be able to do better. So it is not as much about history as much as it is about the future. And now it thrives on myths and rumors, I've already shared with you. And then this is the development, communalism and nationalism. So we are basically looking at a very powerful version of communalism now, which is that it enters into our lives through the narrative of nationalism. Now, if it enters through the narrative of nationalism, then there is hardly anything that you can do. So if I'm a communal person, but I'm presenting myself as a nationalist, then it is very difficult for you to counter my politics. It is very difficult for you to counter my discourse, right? my assertions, because I present myself as a nationalist person. So this is a new development. Not that new. I think this has been around for quite some time, but it particularly becomes very critical in the times we live in the 21st century. So communalism and nationalism, then communalism and democracy, which is that numbers have become so important that the political parties, because they have to get votes, they do not do anything about communal politics for the most part. Because what has happened is that the BJP has somehow managed to get a substantial chunk of the Hindu vote. And that is something that just ruins it, because every election, they will definitely get a certain share of votes. And that makes democracy absolutely pointless, because democracy is fundamentally about uncertainty. Right? Democracy is about vulnerability, political vulnerability. So if a system is not vulnerable, then we are not living in a democracy. And then mediated communalism. So in this regard, we will talk about the role of social media, that how social media has kind of facilitated communalism in the 21st century. Now, quickly, nationalism in India. Now, for quite some time, Indian nationalism actually was very much secular. And in fact, particularly the Indian National Congress, the party that was at the helm of affairs and the party that kind of spearheaded the decolonization movement during the colonial period, that party always claimed itself as the proponent of secular nationalism. And it always differentiated itself. It always said in public that it was different from the Hindu Mahasabha, the Muslim League, and so on. So these were the parties that were considered as sectarian, or these were the parties that were considered as communal, whereas Congress always pitched itself as secular. But was Indian nationalism, even in its formative years, truly secular? This is an important question. So just because the Congress says it is secular, it was secular, is it really the fact that it was secular? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, it wasn't. Indian nationalism actually was not secular in entirety. It was secular here and there, but it wasn't secular thoroughly. And there are many Muslim scholars who've written about this. And the most important voice, of course, is of Allama Iqbal, Muhammad Iqbal, the iconic leader, philosopher, thinker, poet. from the 20th century, 19th, 20th centuries, and he extensively has written about the communalism of Congress. Then you have people like Maulana Muhammad Ali Jawhar, another iconic nationalist Muslim leader, and he always insisted, he always, in particularly during the last years of his life, 1925 onwards, after the abolition of the Khilafat movement, he was writing about how that whatever the Hindus did was considered as national, and whatever the Muslims did was considered as communal. So he was pointing out that Indian nationalism was not that secular after all. So credible scholarly interventions inform us that nations, and this is again something that many people have written about. Anthony Smith has written about this. Eric Hobsbawm has written about this. That nations, this reference, this modern category, that nations are not intrinsically secular categories, meaning that they are not secular on their own, right? You can project them as secular categories, but they are not secular on their own. So there is always a possibility of a nation getting into some sort of an exclusivist politics. So they can rest on exclusivist claims, and they do rest on exclusivist claims. Think about the nationalism in Western Europe right now, where a certain kind of hatred or aversion is there towards immigrants. So you can have racial exclusion, you can have ethnic exclusion, you can have exclusion of religious minorities, immigrants, and so on. So nation is not really a secular category intrinsically. Now, Indian nationalism in its initial stirrings, it proceeded via Hindu Renaissance of the. So basically, even Indian nationalism, if you think about the early 19th century, it started with some sort of Hindu reform. So Indian nationalism was always tied up with Hinduism. So it was not really secular the way we understand secular, right? It was always inclined towards a certain religious worldview. So that is something that we need to. So there was an unmistakable Hindu tinge in the expression of Indian nationalism. And several prominent leaders, and I've spoken about Iqbal and Maulana Muhammad Ali Jawhar, that they actually spoke about this. They spoke about the communal foundations of Indian nationalism. Now, very quickly, communalism and nationalism. So to think of communal nationalism or nationalist communalism is to reckon with the irony of all the political irony. This is really an irony in the sense that nationalism was supposed to question communalism, right? So the argument is that if you're truly a nationalist, you cannot be a communal person. And if you're a communal person, you cannot be a nationalist. But here we are, where nationalism and communalism go together. And therefore, I consider this as the irony of all the political ironies. So communalism signifies a politics of belonging that does not emphasize the nation in all its diversity. So basically, anyone who is communal is somebody who is anti-nation. So a communal person is truly speaking an anti-national, right? Because a communal person does not really help the agenda of nation building. So the nation in its diversity is something that communalism does not entertain. And nationalism, but off late, what has happened is that nationalism in India has become very, very exclusivist, right? It has become very, very exclusivist nationalism off late. So the idea of India as a nation now is strictly confined to a certain religion. So we are basically witnessing in India where nationalism is identified, is reckoned with through a certain religious idiom. So it has a specific reading of history and a very, very fixed understanding of culture. So basically, India presented as a Hindu nation, right? And therefore, Indian nationalism as something like Hindu nationalism. So there are all kinds of developments, and I'm sure some of you are aware of it. There are dietary practices related issues. So, for instance, beef consumption, you can actually be killed singing of national anthem. So it is forcefully done, and there are many videos which are very violent videos that people are being lynched. And as this person is about to die, as the person is breathing his last, he's about to die. All these lumpens, they kick him in the guts and they ask him to sing the national anthem. So they are all communal people, and they are killing this person or they're beating this person because he happens to be a Muslim. But the pretext is nationalism. So they are saying that you sing national anthem, otherwise we will keep beating you. So it's like communalism that is camouflaged by nationalism. So singing of national anthem, chanting of Bharat Mata Ki Jai, reciting Vande Mataram. So there are also many videos where, some poor innocent Muslim person who looks like a Muslim, a bearded person with perhaps a skull cap, will be stopped by a few youngsters who are unemployed and useless, and they will stop him and they will hold him and they'll beat him and they'll ask him to sing Vande Mataram. Now, many Muslims have pointed this out that you cannot really sing Vande Mataram because Vande Mataram is Hail or I worship my motherland. Now, the Muslims have pointed out that this is not really fine as far as the Islamic essentials are concerned. That as a Muslim, I cannot really say Vande Mataram because it goes against my faith. And this is something that the communal people know. So they make use of it. They make use of it all the time. So they will ask you to recite Vande Mataram. And of course, if you don't recite Vande Mataram, you're beaten up. And you're beaten up so violently that very often you actually die on the spot. And this has happened again and again. So anyone who speaks against these utterly unacceptable practices are instantly termed as anti-national. So the moment you speak against these practices, because these folks actually present themselves as nationalists, so the moment you speak against these practices, these acts, you are called anti-national, and there are criminal proceedings against you. And very often in the public discourse, you are asked to go to Pakistan. This is something that has been happening for quite some time, right? That Muslims are asked repeatedly to go to Pakistan. That if you're not happy here, then why the hell do you not go to Pakistan? It is a disturbingly emotional kind of nationalism. So this communalist nationalism is a very, very charged up nationalism, where nation is understood through Hindu religious idioms. Communal nationalism goes against pluralism and diversity, and it presents a very flat and one-dimensional understanding of nation. The fact of the matter is that nation is not a homogeneous entity, and there are so many people who've written about this. There is Ernst Renan's very, very famous articulation, nation as a daily plebiscite, right? And of course, that has been questioned, but there is a way in which people have been talking about this. But what communalism does is that it presents a very flat understanding of nation. And since it presents a very flat understanding of nation, you also have subsequently a very flat understanding of national and nationalism. So it has led to a foundational question. And this is an important question. And this is a question that is pursued in an article by a famous US academic, Gyanendra Pandey. It's called Can a Muslim Be an Indian? That is the title of the article as well. This came out in 1992 in Comparative Histories Journal. Can a Muslim be an Indian? Right? This is a very important question. That can a Muslim be an Indian? It's a misplaced skepticism vis-a-vis the Indianness of the Indian Muslim. So this is something that many scholars have been talking about. And Gyan Pandey has extensively looked into this, this whole idea of can a Muslim be an Indian? And lastly, the Hinduistic projection of the Indian nation, it poses a serious threat specifically to the political existence of Muslims, yes. So the severest of all the enemies is the Muslim, and then subsequently, of course, the Christians, right? And as I pointed out in the beginning, that Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains and Zoroastrians, they are kind of left to live in peace. But these two communities, their life is hell. So Muslims in particular are victims of this exclusivist nationalism, as we have seen the cases of violence with respect to alleged cases of beef eating. You might be aware of how, on the alleged reporting of somebody smuggling cow or somebody slaughtering cow, people have been killed. And there have been so many cases of lynching, particularly in North India. So beef eating is one thing through which they do this, cow smuggling, refusal to chant Vande Mataram, and so on. So all of this gets legitimized through nationalism. They are subjected to peerless communal violence, legitimized by them, lacking in patriotic zeal and nationalist credentials. So they carry out violence, all these communal forces, but they legitimize this violence by presenting themselves as nationalists, as patriotic people of the country. And lastly, in all the big cities of India, Muslims are denied apartments and shops on rent. So the owners often said, and this was a survey that was done by The Hindu, a famous, very, very prestigious newspaper of India, where the owners simply said that we will rent it out to an Indian, which is a very interesting thing to say, because are they suggesting that Muslims are not Indian? So even in Delhi, in parts of in Bombay, in Bangalore, there is it's very difficult for a Muslim to actually find a rented apartment. It's very, very difficult. So you can only find a rented apartment in a place which is predominantly minority settled, predominantly inhabited by minorities, or you could just run into a sensible Hindu. But other than that, it's very difficult to find a rented apartment. So this is a classic case of how communalism hides behind nationalism. Now, democracy, very quickly, it's directly informed by the vision of freedom, equality, and justice of the leaders of the national movement. When we are talking about democracy in India, it is the Constitution of India that is the bedrock of Indian democracy. So without the Constitution, we cannot really discuss Indian democracy. India has a representative democracy, right? It's not, so here we actually elect our leaders.
Excuse me, Dr. Irfan. I think you have probably 5 minutes more, so we can give the floor to the question and answer.
Yeah, no, my apologies, but I was actually told an hour, and we started at 2:50. We started 20 minutes late, so I was just thinking, can I get 10 minutes?
Yeah, I think there is democracy and social media topic left. If you can just,
okay,
discuss, but not by relying on the slides, if you can.
Yeah, I'll leave this and straight away come to this, right? So communalism and democracy. So Indian democracy has turned totally majoritarian. What does that mean? That it has kind of the identity of the voter has become more important. So it is leading to a much more insidious form of communalism. So politicization of the religious identity, something that we spoke about earlier, it suggests the coming together of religion and politics. And here, all kinds of anti-democratic things are happening. So the politics of the vote bank. So of course, in a country where you have 79% belonging to a certain community, it is very difficult to kind of not to do something about it, where people are able to vote beyond their identity. So people are reduced to numbers. Then there is what we call disenfranchisement of Indian Muslims. What does that mean? Basically means that there are, for instance, the BJP, the ruling party right now, it openly says that we do not want Muslim votes, right? So when a community is told on its face that their vote does not matter, this is what we call disenfranchisement. And this is a tragedy. This is a political tragedy of the most inconceivable sort one can imagine. So the Indian Muslims have been told that their vote does not matter. This is disenfranchisement, communal tension, and violence before elections. This is also a very, very usual thing now. Before elections, we will have communal violence. We have riots, we have tension. And through these episodes, there is what we call polarization of the vote bank, right? And so political parties actually do this very often. And communal violence serves their interests. Then there are very, very communal, unapologetically or brazenly communal election campaigns. So all these leaders of the right-wing Hindu parties, if you listen to what they are saying in public, it's absolutely preposterous. You will be aghast at the kind of statements they are making. Very, very communal statements that they make. So this was not the case earlier, but in the past few years, this has become more and more routinized. And votes are sought on the basis of communal agendas. Votes are not sought on the basis of development, on the basis of secular agenda or nation building, but votes are basically sought on the basis of communal agenda. So people are saying that if we come to power, we will just show Muslims their worth. If we come to power, we will not let Muslims flourish, and so on and so forth. And this is the basis on which they get their votes. The demographic composition of India, of course, facilitates such a degeneration. So if we had 25% Muslims, 25% Hindus, 25% Christians, and 25% some other community, then perhaps none of this would have happened. But we are living in a country where you have 79 to 80% of Hindus, which is a staggering majority, and you have 14% of Muslims, and then you have 3% of Christians and 1.7% Sikhs, and so on. So it's a very different demography, and therefore it's very difficult. So the rhetoric of minority appeasement. So the BJP keeps questioning other political parties who speak about the Muslims. So the BJP says that they are into minority appeasement, that they are appeasing the minorities. And this is something that is leading to what we call the consolidation of the Hindu vote. So more and more Hindus are basically coming under one roof, and they are voting for the BJP. So that is really, then there is this reference to Jaffarlaw's Modi's India, Indian nationalism and the Hindu nationalism and the rise of ethnic democracy, which is about democracy becoming very much majoritarian and minorities becoming secondary citizens. And we know the laws that have been passed, the citizenship law that was passed. Now, dissent is demonized. If you protest, then you will be put behind the bars and you will remain in the jail for God knows how long. There are many activists who've been rotting in the jail for years now. So there is a gap between democracy and legitimacy. So we have democracy, but is it a legitimate democracy is something that scholars are pointing. So the crucial question remains, does Indian democracy necessarily produce outcomes that all citizens can accept? Right? No, it does not. So it produces outcomes that are good for Hindus, but it produces outcomes that are absolutely, absolutely unacceptable for the Muslims and the Christians. Does Indian democracy bring in a political climate of equality and justice? Not at all. So I will not go into the overview of social media. I'll just straight away talk.
So, excuse me, Dr. Irfan. I think we can ask a question about the end of the presentation. Like frankly talking, like conversing without looking at the slides. Just we can directly ask question about social media. Is it okay?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah, to save time,
Okay. All right.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, it is kind of unfortunate that we have to, not to be able to see the rest of the slides that Dr. Irfan has prepared because of time limits. So if you have any question, you can just raise your hand, and then the IT will open your speaker to speak. Okay, I think I see somebody's raising hands. Okay. Then let me just ask a direct question about the things that has not been explained. So with social media, like how social media play roles in in the increase negativity or in communalism in India. I think that's question that will answer the rest of the slides. Can you explain that, Dr. Irfan?
Sure. Simply put, so one thing that we are of course aware of is that social media works differently in different political contexts. So it works differently in a country like India. It works differently in a country like US, given the broader political cultural contexts in which they operate. Now, in the case of India, what has happened is that there is already a certain mood, for the lack of a better word. There is already a certain communal mood that is there. And what social media does is, several years ago, I'll just quickly point this out. Several years ago, there was an advertisement of an internet provider company that carried the face of the Prime Minister of India. So the Prime Minister of India was basically promoting the ad. And this has not happened at all. This is unprecedented. The head of the state never, never markets or never sells any product. And we were all quite disturbed. But then we realized that, he was being very intelligent because free internet, and this company was basically providing free internet, and free internet just ruined it. So what happened was that, so many people, millions and millions of people, they bought these SIMs. And then through free internet, they had access to WhatsApp and all kinds of other social media platforms. And then began this endless cycle of circulating rumors and doctored photographs and doctored videos. And before you could even figure out what is wrong with that, already this has reached millions of people. And it's very difficult to kind of check that. So social media in that sense has played a very important, very crucial role in a certain sense, taking communalism to new territories. For instance, in the rural areas, there are few scholars who point out that free internet is also to be considered as a reason for people becoming more and more communal in their orientation. And lastly, the government of India, the ruling party, actually has its IT cell. And what the IT cell does is that it kind of promotes all kinds of baseless, quote unquote, news And this kind of does the damage. And there is, may they be blessed. There is a platform which is called Alt News, and Pratik heads that. And Alt News, what they do is they keep informing us about fake news. So this is precisely what Alt News has been doing. That whenever there is a fake news, they do their analysis and then they present their analysis, and they try to inform people that whatever you are being informed about is actually fake. It is not right. It is not true. So social media in that sense, and all of us have access to news now. So most of us carry smartphones, and this is like communalism on the go, as we say, right? So while you're traveling, while you're sitting, while you're chit-chatting, you can get messages, and you can keep forwarding these messages. And social media also makes a case for what we call convenient consumption. So for instance, if you have to understand a problem, you might want to spend some time. You might want to read some books. You might want to read some articles. You might want to listen to some great professors. It will take a while. But in social media, what happens is that there is a meme, there is a poster that is shared, and immediately you are convinced that you know everything about the Kashmir problem. You know everything about the beef problem. You know everything about the Muslim question, and so on. So it's a very convenient kind of consumption.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Irfan. Thank you. I think I've seen Kevin Henry Villanueva raising hand. I will invite him to talk.
Yes, Dr. Dr. Farooqi, do you hear me?
Yes, very
much. Wonderful. I'm sorry, I caught you, I think, about 20-30 minutes into your talk, but I had difficulty trying to get into getting into the link. Okay, but absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing your presentation, and I hope we can continue this conversation. I'm one of the fellows now at the Universitas Islamic International Indonesia, right? And I'm Filipino Spanish, but I'm zooming in from Taiwan. Okay, my question will be here. I think we can safely say that there is a general understanding that our notions of the state are very much tied to our notions of the nation, and vice versa. Okay, at least if we look at this, my discipline is I'm IR, I'm international relations. So this is where I'm coming from, or at least this is where I'm coming in from now. Vice versa, so the nation as well as somehow being, should I say, defined by a state. Okay, and India as a bona fide member of the international community, I think, finds itself somehow in this dilemma of how to define the state and how to define its democracy and so on. So my question here is grammatical vocabulary on one level. How do you compare, because I missed a lot of the nuances when you were talking about communalism. How do you compare or contrast the relationship between the state and nationalism and the state and communalism? Okay, I think related to that, and because I've been really excited about your talk here, I think related to that is possibly a subtext, which is how do you look at state power in the case of India? Okay, what resources does it actually marshal or manipulate? Okay, and I think, to clarify a little bit my position, I'm not very happy with the way that with the international norms that we have now. So I can imagine where you're, I can see where you're coming from, where I think we have to, unless I'm misrepresenting what you're saying, there is a disjunct between our notion of democracy, okay, and from I'm almost tempted to say from what democracy, from the principle of democracy seen from politics more fundamentally as freedom. Because when you say that we are a democracy in India, but to the detriment of the minorities, how is it really a democracy? Okay, I'm sorry. I've tried to be as clear as possible. Yeah, thank you.
There's some solidarity here. We both have bad throats.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the reason is because we've just had elections in the Philippines, so you can just imagine how all of this is so fresh.
Philippines is another concern.
Yes, absolutely.
But thank you. I hope Dr. Diliana, can we just take one question and then move on to others, or we take 2-3 questions in one go and then respond to them?
I think it's good if we directly answer. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. So thank you very much. I think these are very insightful reflections and very meditative, shall I say. So I think I kind of passingly reflected on these, but not, of course, as much as one should, because I was actually interested in the subsequent slides more than the slides I was presenting. So in the context of state and nationalism and state and communalism, what has happened in the case of India, and there are many scholars who've written on this very, very poignantly, people like Ashish Nandi, people like Partha Chatterjee and others, they've reflected on this very perceptively, that at the moment, the state, and you also referred to state resources. So as of now, the state, as we speak, has been, unfortunately, tragically, hijacked by a certain non-democratic spirit. Right? So the state actually, of course, the state speaks to us, and who should know this better than you? I am not really the person to speak on these matters, but just to kind of flag the foundational idea that the state reaches us through its practices. Mm-hmm. And these practices are invariably the acts, the enactments, the laws. These are, of course, informed by the ruling party. So what has happened of late is that there is a certain kind, of course, state and nationalism go a long way, but unfortunately, because of the hijacking that has taken place of late, and as I also spoke about, I think towards the second half of my presentation, that one can see all kinds of anti-minority laws that are being introduced, that are being implemented. And there is, so for instance, think about this. So, the BJP at the moment can actually get any law passed. It can actually get any law passed, and I mean it. And how is it that it can get any law passed? Because for a bill to be turned into a law, what you need to do is you need to get approval of the majority of the House of the lower, the Lok Sabha, and then the House, the upper house. And as of now, as we speak, you have a stunning majority of BJP in both the houses. So as a result, what happens is that, so for instance, when we are thinking about the Citizenship Amendment Act, so many of us thought that there will be some deliberation in the parliament, but there wasn't any deliberation. So, and therefore you also realize that is discussion and deliberation of any worth? Because if you, let's say you're a politician and you step out of your house in the morning, knowing very well that you're going to speak against the bill. And then in the parliament, there is this 3-hour theatrics, this mockery of discussion. And then after 3 hours, you end up casting your vote in favor of the bill. Then nothing changed. So then the question is, should we have discussions? Right? Does it really matter? So to come back to the question, it has been hijacked. It has been hijacked most mercilessly. And as a result of that, what has happened is that it has become very difficult now, as we speak. It has become very difficult to make a distinction between nationalism and communalism. Because in most of the cases, the communal forces pitch themselves as nationalist forces. As we speak, I was just reading a news a while ago that in the madrasas of Uttar Pradesh is the state in India and has a fairly substantial Muslim population. In the madrasas of Uttar Pradesh, the singing of the national anthem has been made compulsory, right? Now, these are very interesting developments. Now, this is a typical communal move. There are no two opinions about it. But then this is pitched as a nationalist move. Now, if you were to write against it, then people are going to hound you. You will be chastised. You will be called an anti-national because you're speaking against national anthem. And little did they understand that the Hindu right is basically making use of the national anthem as well. So the problem is theirs, not mine, if I write against it. So these are some very striking developments. And in relation to state resources, left, right, and center, whether we are talking about the judiciary, whether we are talking about the executive, we are talking about the legislature, for the most part, things are horrendously compromised. There is hardly any scope, unless there is a revolutionary transformation, a massive transformation. So as we speak, things are not very exciting. Things are not very hopeful because, so for instance, let's say that there is something that you're not okay with and you go to the court. Now, the court very often will just, will not entertain your plea to begin with. And all kinds of silly judgments, for instance, the hijab controversy judgment you might have gotten to read. It's one of the most silliest judgments you can imagine, right? But it is a judgment. Now, if you speak against this, then there is contempt of court. So how do you handle these things? And the minority, therefore, so whether it is the bureaucracy or it is the judiciary or it is the legislature, three hands. And then, once we are done with that, the media, for the most part, things remain very, very brazenly anti-minority because everybody is interested in numbers. So media is interested in what we call TRP, the ratings. Now, how do you manage ratings? You manage ratings by doing things that are popular. What is popular? Communalism is popular. So you indulge in all kinds of silly communal narratives. And they are doing very well. If you ever watch some of the Indian news channels, you will be aghast at the kind of reporting they're doing. It's a blot on journalism. And Indian media, as many people have pointed out, that is the worst of the media of the world. It is the worst. There are just no two opinions about it. How compromised and completely sold out, as it were. And then lastly, minorities and democracy. This is something that I wanted to actually speak about, and I did not get time, but let me just take a minute here. The reason why we speak about democracy is because democracy offered, so when we say democracy is for the people,
right.
It is not, and I'm sure you know this way better than I do, people is not a vague category here. There is a certain reference here. People is a powerless category. So essentially a system of rule that offers possibilities to the marginalized. Now, for instance, in a country like India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, you name a country, democracy should offer possibilities, political, economic, cultural, and existential, to minorities. So for instance, why is it that we need democracy in India? Because India has religious minorities. And if we do not have democracy, then God knows what will happen to, what the fate will be. So it was supposed to do something for the minorities. It was supposed to, as we know, that democracy is not just about some kind of a calendared ritual, that every 5 years we will all queue up and we'll cast our vote and then we are done with our responsibility as these informed citizens of the largest democracy of the world. That's absolute nonsense. Democracy is about a transformation. So when we have democracy in a country, what we are basically suggesting is that there has to be a certain transformation of the people. People need to become more and more democratic. So democracy is about democratization of the public sphere. So for 75 years, if nothing has changed, if I'm still voting as a Hindu, and if I'm still voting as a person of a certain identity, then there is something wrong with the trajectory of democracy in the country. That's what I was.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Irfan. I hope the answer.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. I look forward to continuing this. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I think you can exchange email if there are some more things that need to be discussed, So basically we have like 3 more questions coming up probably, but we have, only 5 minutes left. So I'm going to give only one question probably. If Dr. Irfan can make it as short as possible, that is going to be great. We can take another one. So a question from Nufus. Nufus has been waiting. Yeah, Nufus, take your floor, Nufus. Keep it short.
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Irfan from Indonesia. Actually, it's very interesting when you talk about the communal, because I think in the several week or several months that India facing the high tension of the conflict communal, especially when the Karnataka province that ban the student to use hijab to campus. What's going on in India? Whether India want to be really secular state, or it's just only policy based of the political interest from the elites? Thank you.
Well, thank you. So simply put, you see, right now, I think the communal agenda is much more intelligent as compared to the communal agenda earlier. So earlier it was more brazen and it was more insensitive, but now I think they've become a little more wise, should we say, a little wiser. So they actually rally around issues that are taken as or projected as secular issues. So for instance, if you think about the hijab controversy as well, it was always pitched as a very secular move. The idea that there has to be uniformity, the idea that everyone is equal. So, you know, from the vantage point of the Constitution, this is the way in which it was pitched, that we are basically not communal. What we are doing is something that is in the spirit of what we call political universalism. Now, we know very well that this is never the case. You know, this is outrightly and brazenly communal. So as of now in India, I think for the most part, I don't think India is trying to be secular. India is the ruling party is very clear about it. They keep saying that we have always been secular, which is utter nonsense. Secularism is a policy, it's a doctrine, it's a position that is very much to do with post-French Revolution world. And so they've been saying that we don't need secularism because once we have the Hindu state or the Hindu Rashtra, everything else will be taken care of. So there is a very clear case against secularism. And in fact, they mock at people who speak the secular language. So they mock at them all the time. Secondly, I think because of this voting business, the numbers, there are many political parties who also don't speak anything because they also do not want to lose out of votes. So there are very few political parties that are speaking for the minorities right now because they want their seats intact. So as of now, I think the fate of secularism is not very exciting. Things are actually on a downhill because of the political culture, because of the vulgarization of politics, as a political scientist pointed out several years ago. So this is what I would say. That's what it is right now. We can take another question, Dr. Tilia.
Okay, how is the nufus?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Irfan. So we have Yan Ruby is here. I think she is the first one who raised hand and want to ask. I don't know if she's still in the audience. Okay, then we can just continue to a question from Dr. Ridwan. Dr. Ridwan asking in the chat box, Dr. Farooqi, thanks for your informative presentation. Short comment, can you elaborate a bit more why Muslim cannot be accepted in Hinduism community in India? Why they cannot live peacefully there? I think this is also, you know, short answer can be done, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll try to. These are things that remain crucial for the rest of our lives. But so there isn't, Muslims have been living with Hindus for quite some time now. So there will be nothing new if things were to continue. Hindus have always been the majority and Muslims have always been the minority. And there was never an issue till the late 18th century. So there is nothing wrong. I think no Muslim is pointing out that we cannot live with Hindu majority. I think that's perfectly fine. And this is what India is. I think the concern that the Muslim community has is that, this should not turn into a majoritarianism, right? That Muslims living with Hindus should not imply that Muslims become secondary citizens. So just because my numbers are less than yours, it should not mean that my vote is less important than your vote. I think that is the crucial question. And this is something that the minorities are rallying around. Just because I'm 15% of the population and you are 79% of the population, we should not reach a stage where my vote, which is the case right now, my vote is meaningless. I could keep voting, but my vote will not make any difference. That is something. So living together, it is not just about Muslims living with Hindus. It's also about Hindus living with Muslims, right? We have to invert it. And we have to think about whether the Hindus, and this is something that I've written in the presentation as well, that the only way in which secularism in India can be saved is by the majority. It is only the Hindus of India who can save Indian secularism, who can bring back peace and harmony in this country. Muslims cannot do anything because they hardly matter. Christians cannot do anything because they're negligible. It is the Hindus. If they decide that they will not fall a prey to communal politics, that they will not endorse any kind of hatred, bigotry, and discriminatory practice, then I think we are safe. Then I think all these useless political parties will be shown the door. So it is not just about whether Muslims are willing to live with Hindus. It's also about what is it that the Hindus have in mind when they think about living with Muslims. So this is something that I would say. Briefly, of course, there's more to it, but I think I'll stop here.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan. I think thank you so much for being on time, finishing this session. I think we got so many information from basic one, to the experiences, to the possible empirical discussion, So thank you so much for the audiences who are here and the questioners.
Sorry, I just want
those questions are really terrific. Yes, Dr. Irfan saying something?
This is the correct email ID that I have typed. You actually ended up typing the wrong email ID. So I have typed the correct email ID.
Yes. Oh, okay. This is the correct email. Okay. I think everybody can take note, or we will send through emails later on. So I think we have to close the Brownbag Seminar Series 6. So congratulations to Dr. Irfan. Thank you so much for being here. So see you next time, inshallah.
Thank you very much, each one of you. Thank you.